This is my client Emma. Emma is a competitive Olympic weightlifter who had been dealing with some pretty bad shoulder pain for quite a while before coming to work with me. As an Olympic weightlifter, her snatching and jerks were being really affected by her shoulder pain. And with weightlifting being pretty much a fully overhead sport, it was really impacting her ability to just train overall, enjoy her training, and compete to the level that she wanted to be competing at. Before working with me, she had tried getting PRP injections and going through traditional physical therapy for help with the shoulder pain. But what she found was that the physical therapy that she did really wasn't geared towards lifters. Her PT didn't know how to modify her training, couldn't help guide her training, and the rehab plan that she was given was really low level, pretty cookie cutter, and ultimately just didn't get her to where she wanted to be. She had less shoulder pain with a lot of daily activities, but she still really couldn't snatch, jerk, or even press overhead without a lot of shoulder pain and instability. So because of this, she reached out to me and scheduled a consultation call to see if I could help her out. When we started working together, the first step was that her and I hopped on an actual video assessment. So this was a call designed to really understand what exactly was going on with her shoulder, why her injury happened, and what needed to be done to help her solve it and get back to lifting at 100%. So the first thing that we did is just talk through her training history, injury history, goals, timelines, training schedule, all that sort of stuff, so that we could nail down the really big pictures of her training and rehab program. From there, I then took her through a pretty thorough full body movement assessment to actually look at her strength and flexibility and stability and basically find out what limitations or deficits she had that were either because of her shoulder pain or contributed to her getting shoulder pain in the first place. This assessment really helped us guide how to actually program her rehab and training work for her and how to progress her back to 100%. The big things that we really found with Emma's assessment was that she was limited in her thoracic spine range of motion, so her upper back flexibility, and this is really important for overhead athletes and Olympic weightlifters for sure. She also had limitations in her rotator cuff strength and endurance, as well as just the overall shoulder stability due to the nature of her injury. So with the rehab work that we programmed for her, this was a really big focus of what her actual program was like. And I'm going to take you through exactly what we programmed and how we progressed it next. So this is a breakdown of Emma's actual rehab program that I designed for her. Emma was following an already structured weightlifting program through the gym and coach that she was working with. So for her, I didn't actually program her weightlifting training. I just programmed the rehab work side of things. So initially, I did help her modify her weightlifting training around her shoulder pain by manipulating volume, intensity, exercise variation, stuff like that, so she could continue training the movements that she needed to train without just really aggravating her shoulder pain, making this process harder or more drawn out than it otherwise needed to be. So for her rehab plan, she trained 5 days per week, Monday through Friday. So that's how we structure her rehab work as well to make it as time efficient as possible. So we had her do rehab work when she was at the gym. Initially, she would typically do these before her main training as a bit of movement prep or warm up. And I'll break down the actual days and how we progress things week to week and then block to block as we go. So again, the big things that we wanted to work on with Emma were her shoulder stability, rotator cuff strength endurance, posterior shoulder strength endurance, and her thoracic spine mobility. So that's really what we focused on in this program. So on day one, we start with some bottoms up kettlebell shoulder screwdrivers for a lot of shoulder stability and direct rotate cuff work. We then did some 90-90 band external rotations, and we had her do 5-second holds initially to limit loading a little bit so it wouldn't be painful on her shoulder. And we ended that session with a half nail and band rotation, which is a really nice exercise that gives you a little bit of direct posterior shoulder work for strength and endurance and thoracic spine mobility at the same time. As you'll see, we use reps in reserve to dictate most of the load or intensity for her movements that require resistance, whether dumbbells, kettlebells, bands, whatever. And we do this to ensure that she's actually training hard enough to get the strength endurance adaptations out of her rehab work that she wants to. This way she's not just doing endless band external rotations with 10, 15 reps in reserve and just kind of wasting time not actually getting improvements in strength endurance. So that was day one. Day two, we did some hands elevated single arm scat push-ups to work on shoulder stability and some serratus anterior strength. And then we did some thoracic extensions on the foam roller to really open up her T-spine. And we ended the day with prone swimmers to help improve the rotator cuff and posterior shoulder strength and endurance in many different positions. That's one of my favorite kind of introductory shoulder rehab drills for overhead athletes because you can like modify the range of motion so that it's tolerable and doesn't flare up your shoulder pain. But over time, you can progress it and expand to just like fully overhead movement to actually train the ranges of motion that you would need for your sport. On day 3, we had her do some chaos bench press, which is a really good shoulder and rotator cuff pressing variation. I had her do a little faster press, so that the weight would oscillate a little bit more, and then pause at the top until the weight stops oscillating to really work on shoulder stability. After that, we did sideline external rotations, which is a really good staple for rotator cuff strength. Train this in the 8 to 10 rep range for about 2 reps in reserve. And then finishing with single arm band angels, which have a very similar function or goal as the prone swimmers. So working on upper back endurance, upper back strength, posterior cuff and posterior shoulder strength and endurance in a range of positions, working fully overhead over time. On day 4, we again did 90-90 shoulder external rotations just to start working her cuff in a little bit more of an elevated position. Side plank power raises for a little bit of shoulder stability and posterior shoulder strength, and then thread the needles again for upper back mobility. And on the last day, we did some chaos strict pressing. Again, same sort of cueing and training as the bench press variation, but now it's more specific to weightlifting due to being fully overhead. And then we ended with some sideline kettlebell rotations with 5-second holds to open up her T-spine and develop a little bit more shoulder stability. And then ended with some half kneeling windmills, again, giving a nice combination of shoulder stability and thoracic spine mobility as well. So that was her first kind of full week of rehab work. She did that 5 days in a row like she would with her normal weightlifting training. And then at the end of each week, we had her fill in this little check-in questionnaire about her symptoms, sleep, nutrition, life stress, all that sort of stuff. So we can actually gauge how she's doing, answer any questions she has, and then ultimately game plan for the next week, because we write these programs 1 week at a time so that we can adjust for week to week and day-to-day changes. So moving on to week 2 of block 1, the movements on any given day stay pretty much the same week to week in a block, but really what changes is the volume and the intensity. Overall, we want to start a little bit more conservative with most people so that we don't cause a big flare-up in symptoms. And then over time, we progress the volume and intensity to match their goals and their capabilities and their symptom progression. So we added in a set for the kettlebell screwdrivers as an optional kind of set. We reduced the reps in reserve for a lot of different motions, like the 90-90 band external rotations, the prone swimmers, the band angels, all that sort of stuff, and continue to just progress overall volume and intensity to keep up with her symptoms. We also increase the volume of the direct pressing work through the chaos bench press and the chaos strict press. So moving on to weeks 3 and 4 of the first block, the same basic pattern stays the same. She did really well pretty much all throughout her 4 weeks, or 4 months rather, without really any big flare-ups. So she had some pretty steady increases in volume and intensity and exercise variation week to week and block to block. So the only big difference in week 3 from prior weeks of the first block is that we now added in a little bit more direct overhead stability work through the pike handstand shoulder taps. That's one that I use with a lot of my Olympic weightlifting and CrossFit athletes because it has a lot of good carryover to the positions and movements that they have to train regularly in their lifting. So moving on to block 2, she did great over block 1, started to have a lot less pain, feel a lot more confident and a lot more strength in her shoulder. So we progressed most of the exercise variations, and we did that one of 2 ways. We either progressed the intensity of the movements through the rep range and the reps in reserve range, or we actually progressed the variation movement itself. So instead of the regular bottoms up kettlebell screwdriver on her back, we now went to a sideline kettlebell screwdriver, which makes it a little bit harder of a stability demand. We then progressed to band triple threats for the direct cuff work, which you still get the direct posterior shoulder and posterior cuff work, but now adding in the rotation and the press overhead, you get a little bit more of that overhead demand. And similar with the kettlebell armbar, we're now just loading thoracic spine mobility a little bit more. On day 2, we still keep the single arm push-ups, but scat push-ups, but on block 1, we actually had her do them from an elevated position with her hand on a bench to reduce the overall body weight that she was using. And then in this block, we now moved down to the ground to make that a little bit harder with more body weight. Still kept the thoracic extension on the foam rollers and the pike taps, but progressed those to hip taps instead of shoulder taps to have a larger range of motion that she had to move through. And we progressed the direct shoulder and cuff work to Blackburns, which will have a little bit more specificity to weightlifting because it's much more of like a pure overhead range of motion instead of going from all the way down by the hips and then up overhead. You stay from about shoulder height and then just go overhead from there. On day 3, with the chaos benching, we decreased the rep range so that she could naturally use a little bit heavier loading, but still kept the goal of the movement the same, to press fast, cause a lot of oscillation of weight, and then pause at the top to stabilize. For the sideline external rotations, we kept the movement the same, but this week, or this block rather, we reduced the reps per set to 6 to 8 to allow her to use heavier loading to get to like more maximal style loading and lifting, which is how she would be training and competing with weightlifting. It's typically like 1 to 3 rep per set efforts, and we eventually want to have her rehab work reflect the demands of her training. And from there, we ended with band Y pulls, again, just more shoulder and upper back work in a way that's very similar to her like weightlifting snatch position or snatch grip. On day 4, we did some band uppercuts, which are a great rotator cuff and overall shoulder drill for overhead stability. Move the side plank power raises down to 6 to 8 reps, again, to allow for heavier loading. We added a band to the thread the needle variation for the T-spine mobility to just train that mobility in a little bit more intensive manner and build some strength through that range of motion, and ended with pike hip taps just like on day 2. And then on Friday, on day 5 of this week, chaos strict press follows a very similar pattern. And then we now start to add a little bit more high speed movement, which is something that's very much needed for Olympic weightlifting and CrossFit training, through the drop catch push-ups. This is a bit of like a plyo progression that we're going to be doing over the next couple weeks and couple blocks, and that's really important for athletes who have high speed components of their training. And then we ended with kettlebell windmills from her feet for more shoulder and T-spine direct mobility and stability work at the same time. And then just like in the previous block, she did well week to week in this block, so we progressed to volume and intensity pretty much week to week as we could, making sure not to like spike things too high at any one point in time and cause a flare-up in symptoms or anything like that. So moving on from there, week 3, very similar, just progressing volume and intensity. Same thing through week 4, reducing the reps in reserve for most movements, adding a set or 2 here or there for some movements, and then just continue to make sure they're monitoring symptoms and progress and overall lifestyle factors with the weekly check-ins that we had her fill in. All right. So there, for block 3, we summarized kind of blocks 1 and 2, continue to make really good progress. So we figured that we could continue pushing the exercise variation and the intensity and continue to make it more and more similar to her actual weightlifting demands. So for the screwdrivers, we moved to a half getter position to introduce a little bit more of an overhead demand. For the band triple threat, we reduced the reps per set to allow for a greater amount of band tension. And then for the direct shoulder and cuff work, we also added a single arm Cuban press to really work on that rotational control and the overhead work aspect of Olympic weightlifting. Cuban presses are a really great way to directly load shoulder external rotation for weightlifters because it somewhat mimics the actual like path that the barbell would move during the turnover. It's like the end of the second pull of a snatch or clean. For day 2, still keeping in single arm scat push-ups, but now we're having her do them with her feet on a bench or a box so that she's kind of in like an incline position to really increase the demand on that single arm as she's doing this movement. From there, we did GHD T-spine extensions. So she started to demonstrate a lot better just like overall T-spine flexibility. So now we wanted to add in a little bit more like strengthening of this new range of motion. So we had her do these GHD T-spine extensions where she's draped over the GHD and either with a weight across her chest, behind her head, or a band or that sort of thing, and extending up through that newly gained range of motion. And then ending that day with a bent press, which is kind of like an old school like odd lift variation. But it's a really nice one to work on like rotator cuff stability in ways that most people don't when they are rehabbing their shoulders. From there, on day 3, we moved to a chaos snatch grip press from behind the neck. So no longer like just regular overhead pressing or strict pressing. We're using a snatch grip press from behind the neck variation to really mimic the demands of snatching in that variation in her training. Continue to reduce the reps per set for the sidling extra rotation to build up rotator cuff strength and capacity, and then ended with pal raises to directly target the back of the shoulder. On day 4, we moved to an elbow supported cable external rotation because this will really help load the more like lengthened position of the rotator cuff, the posterior rotator cuff, and having the elbow support allows you to load the movement a little bit heavier compared to just a freestanding or like free elbow variation. Continue to increase the overall shoulder stability demands with tall plank crossbody reaches, and then non-wall facing handstand shoulder taps. These are just really good progressions for working on overall shoulder stability and working towards really developing a lot of competency and capacity in the overhead position. For the last day, we ended with chaos push presses. So now we're adding even more speed and stability demands to the movement. Progress the drop catch push-ups to deficit plyo push-ups to just increase that speed and force production demand, and progress the kettlebell windmills weight-wise by reducing the reps per set to allow for heavier loading. And just like the last 2 blocks, she did really well with this first week. So in weeks 2 through 4, we just continue to progress the intensity by dropping the reps in reserve for most exercises here and there, and then adding sets or adding volume over time. And then that takes us to block 4, which was her last block with me. By this time, she was doing really well, having really minimal to like no shoulder pain. So this last block was just really about continuing to build up a really solid foundation for her shoulder, get her shoulder as strong and stable and performing as well as possible, continuing to improve that T-spine mobility as much as we could, and just really prepping her to continue making progress in her performance with her training and competition after we were done working together. So day 1, we moved to a side plank kettlebell screwdriver. So she's not only working the stability and performance of the arm holding the kettlebell, but also the arm that's on the ground that she's doing the plank on. Still did the dumbbell Cuban press, and also added a a Cuban pullover to really work on internal rotation strength, which is something that a lot of people don't actually do when they're working on shoulder rehab work. On day 2, we added in a landmines raise punch to just continue to improve scapular control and stability. Resisted cat-cows as another variation of thoracic kind of like loaded mobility or strengthening, and then progress the bend press rep-wise and intensity-wise. Kept in the chaos snatch grip push presses from behind the neck, but starting off with a little bit more intensity through fewer reps in reserve. Adding in some sideline flexion for her shoulder to work on overhead stability, and then continuing with pal raises over time as well. And then on day 4, we kept in the elbow supported cable external rotations, but we dropped reps per set to allow for heavier loading. Continue with the kettlebell armbar and the wall facing handstand and shoulder taps, but increase the reps per set for those to work on overhead endurance too. And then on day 4, we progressed to a chaos overhead carry. So she's holding a loaded barbell overhead with the hanging weights, walking back and forth to really increase the stability demand on the shoulder and improve endurance with this as well over time by having her do more steps and more overall volume. Progress the plyo variations to drop plyo push-ups, so really increasing the plyometric demand, and then ending with kettlebell windmills again with lower reps per set. So just like all the other blocks pretty much, she progressed very well throughout this week. And we spent the next 3 weeks just progressing volume and intensity very steadily. And by the end of the 4th block, she was basically 100% pain-free. She's been continuing to train hard, perform well. She's competed at least once since we worked together in weightlifting, and she's been doing great. So this isn't like necessarily what you should be doing for your shoulder injury or your injury in general. This is very much an example of how we build, develop, and progress a rehab plan for a barbell athlete based upon what their training is like, what their goals are, and what their injuries like. So we took all of that information into account, made this very individualized program for Emma, and made sure that we progressed in real time with how she's doing, made sure that we're checking in with her every single week to keep up with any flares or any questions she has or anything like that. And at the end of the day, just progressing her slowly and steadily towards the type of lifting and type of demand that she has for her training to get her back to 100%. So I hope that this was helpful. If you're dealing with an injury and you're looking for help with it, and you think that this might be the right option for you, then just click the link below and we can for sure schedule a consultation call and determine if we're the right fit for you. And if we are, kind of walk you through what our process is like and figure out the next steps from there.